I want to welcome you, everybody who's here, to our workshop. Now we will be heard on the United Nations World Citizens Initiative. My name is, so first a few technical things you probably all know. Please stay muted for the entire time. And if you want to say something, of course, you can unmute yourself. If you want to say something, you can raise your hand or write something in the chat. We will definitely we'll be monitoring this. Also, you may have noticed that we are recording this session. If you want to stay anonymous, you can switch off the camera and change the name on the screen. But of course, we're happy to see you while we speak and debate. My name is Kim Graves. I'm an Internet Democracy International, and I was part of organizing these events. Most of you will probably know Democracy International. It's a non-governmental organization seated in Cologne in Germany, and it supports democracy activists around the world and also campaigns for more direct democratic tools on a transnational level. And in that context, Democracy International is part of the We the People's campaign that calls for more democratic and inclusive United Nations by suggesting three institutional changes into the UN framework, which are the European Citizens Initiative, the Parliamentary Assembly, and the Civil Society Envoy. And all of these three, we will introduce some of these ideas to you in this workshop series, plus the idea of a World Citizens Assembly. So what will we do today? We will start off showing you the results of the challenges that you guys sent. Then afterwards we'll have a quick, we have a bit of time to answer the questions that you might still have about the UN World Citizens Initiative. And then Daniela will give a quick 1-minute pitch on why the Citizens Initiative is actually a good idea. And then I will try to argue why it's a bad idea. And I hope everybody will partake in the discussion and we can have a lot of fun and learn things. So Caro, please tell us what happened with the challenges.
Yes, thank you very much, Kim. Yes, so my name is Caroline Vernijen. I also work for Democracy International. Democracy International, as Kim mentioned, is one of the organizations that really launched this campaign for a World Citizens Initiative. We are based in Cologne. We are German. We really focus on direct democracy and citizen participation. And this is, of course, also where our interest in the World Citizens Initiative comes from, because we think that in a global world, citizen participation tools need to exist on all levels, including the transnational one. And so this webinar is a little bit different than what we have done before, because we asked you to fill in challenges and to read up and to look at things beforehand. Our hope was that way we can make this a little more interactive. And then afterwards we will have hopefully a really lively debate with all of you. But just in case you haven't had the time to look at these challenges beforehand, or if you registered after the challenges were sent out, the idea would be that I give you a little bit of a recap on what the World Citizens Initiative is and what happened with the challenges. I would start at the beginning. So we are talking tonight about a UN World Citizens Initiative. So what is that? Where does that idea come from? If you took part in the challenges, then you've seen a little video, but I'm going to give you the executive summary of that anyway. I think if you're here tonight, then you probably agree with us, or you see it like we do, that we live in a global interconnected world, and that has many advantages, but it also puts us face to face with very complex global challenges. I think the pandemic being an excellent example of that. We don't, for the level of technology that we have and the level of interconnectedness and links that we have to each other, we don't have many instruments at the global level to address these challenges. So our world really still operates on a state-based system that was developed in the context of the aftermath of the Second World War, and it made sense then. But since then, we've really we've evolved. We've created so many more possibilities to organize ourselves. The digital revolution alone is something that that really opens up huge opportunities and huge potential that we are not using, we think, to the fullest. So the most important arena of global governance right now, so if we want to make decisions at the global level, we have to go to the UN, the United Nations right now. This is the best instrument, the best forum that we have. But it still is indirect and very state-based. And so an issue that we see there is that normal citizens are not given a seat at the table. And that is especially problematic when we see that many of the problems that we have are transnational, they transcend borders. And so there are issues that actually fall outside of the interest of states, but that are in the interest of people everywhere. And so this is why we came up with the idea of a UN World Citizens Initiative. It's an instrument that would allow citizens, if you gather enough signatures in enough different countries, and we will go into more detail on that later, to put an item on the UN agenda. So it's basically a way to signal this topic is a priority for us. It's a priority for enough people around the world that something should be done about it. And so it's really important not to see this as an anti-tool. This is not an anti-member states tool, not an anti-government tool. It's a complementary tool that really allows people to say, this is a topic that we think for whatever reason you're forgetting. It's being left off the agenda. It's being overlooked, and we would like to raise a spotlight on that. So when we first had this idea, the first thing we did was clarify, of course, that this is possible and feasible, and that this is a realistic idea. So we asked 2 legal experts to have a look at the UN Charter, to have a look at international laws, and to look at examples that exist around the world, and to see if and how a UNWCI, World Citizens Initiative, could be implemented. And the short answer is that yes, it's possible. It's absolutely possible. The UN Charter provides a possibility to set up new subsidiary organs of the UN, not to go into too much detail, but we could establish a new part of the UN that would register, verify, and follow up on World Citizens Initiatives. So there's absolutely a legal pathway for that to do that. These experts, it's Dr. Ben Murphy and Dr. James Organ of the University of Liverpool, were even kind enough to sort of draft up sort of a roadmap on how we can get there. And I will post the link to that in the chat because that's available on our website. So if you want to have a look at that later, more reading, then it's possible to look at that there. So the important thing to know is that we didn't have to start from scratch, because it wouldn't be the first transnational tool of direct democracy in the world. In Europe, we already have a European Citizens Initiative. And so that really was a big inspiration to us. And so with this study and with the example of the European Citizens Initiative, we were ready to start our campaign. And we launched in 2019, just ahead of the 75th anniversary year of the UN, which was last year in 2020. We thought that that would be a good moment to really take stock of how the United Nations are working and what can be improved. And the UN obviously thought the same, because throughout 2020, they organized a series of consultations with NGOs, civil society, but also citizens, politicians around the world. In total, over 1.5 million people in all of the UN member states, looking at what do people think of the UN and where do people want the UN to go in the future. And so we thought that is a good time to launch a campaign to also make the UN more democratic and inclusive. So our first step, our first goal was to really get a broad coalition of actors on board. We didn't want to be a European campaign or a Western campaign. We wanted to be really a global campaign because it should be a global tool. And so we started reaching out to civil society organizations around the world who we thought might be interested in this. And so this was our first challenge to you, to like scour the internet and look for organizations who supported the UNWCI, and I think I'm going to try and share my screen at this point. I hope that that works. There we go. Yeah. Right. So, and so these were some of the, can you still see that?
Yes, we can see it.
Sorry?
We can see, yeah, the first slide.
Challenge 1?
No, just slide 1, just the first slide out of 9.
Well, stopped. Okay, yeah, all right. Yeah, okay. Yeah, so we asked you to have a look and see if you can find some of the organizations that suggest that support the World Citizens Initiative. So there was quite a lot of choice because we were very proud of the fact that we have over 200 NGOs right now who have signed on to our campaign and are really part of our alliance and who are helping us push for the World Citizens Initiative at the UN and with their governments in their home countries. And so, yes, so some of those organizations on here is absolutely correct. So Democracy International, that's us, Democracy Without Borders, and Civicus, who are not on here, but it's important to know, we are sort of the founding organizations. The three of us, we came up with this idea and we launched a campaign, and then we had many organizations join us. I see Avaz, that's true. Greenpeace is there, the Stimson Center, Young European Federalists, Global Justice Now, United Nations Association are all organizations that joined us actually really early on, and that we're really, really grateful for their support, helping us share the news. So there's also a couple of things on here that, you know, the UNICEF, UNDP, the EU, those are all UN agencies and international organizations. We would love to have their support, but I think we will have to work a little bit harder until we get there. If you know anybody there, feel free to let them know about this. So right now we really just have NGO, civil society support. Right, and so here's a little bit of an overview of some of our big organizations that are on board with us. The Asia Democracy Network, for example, the Asia Development Alliance, the Institute for Global Policy, the World Women's March. Yeah, so Avaz, Greenpeace, we have a really global coalition that we are really proud of. I also want to show you this. It's a bit dated. We haven't completely updated it, but as I mentioned, we are really, really happy with how many organizations signed on to our campaign until now. So it's over 200 in, I believe, they're active in about 80 countries. So our goal is, of course, to get at least one partner organization in every country, because we need them to convince their ministers of foreign affairs and their member states to push for a World Citizens Initiative at the UN. So we really want to be a global campaign. And so if you are from a country that doesn't have a purple marker on here, feel free to let us know if there's any organizations you know that might help us. Yeah, so in a second challenge, we asked you to have a look at how a World Citizens Initiative would work. So yeah, for those of you who didn't have time to look at that, I will just give you a short recap. So as I mentioned, we didn't start from scratch. This isn't an idea that just sort of fell from the sky. There's many examples of similar tools in different countries. And there's also one big example in the European Union. And so based off of that, our idea was, and this is of course a proposal, we don't know what an instrument will look like in the end, but this is what we consider to be a fair proposal and a good one, is that you would need a committee of 10 citizens who draft a proposal. That could be, we need better climate mitigation tools, or we need a global fund for climate mitigation campaigns, for example, something like this. So it has to be a specific topic. that has to be within the competencies of either the General Assembly or the Security Council, depending on who they want to address it to. And very important is that these citizens come from different countries, because we want to make sure that this, like our campaign, that the World Citizens Initiative itself can't be something that is regionally colored. It would need to be truly global, and so therefore we ask that there's a fair geographical distribution. We didn't make that distribution up either, so that's the actual how the seats are allocated to non-permanent members of the Security Council, meaning 3 from Asia, 2 from Africa, 2 from Western Europe or the Pacific states, 1 from Eastern Europe, and I believe 1 from Northern America and 1 from Southern America. I will check on that again just to make sure that that's correct. Yeah, and so they come up with a specific proposal. Then they need to gather 5 million signatures within at least 10 countries, again, following like fair geographical representation to make sure that enough people in enough different countries support this idea. And they, of course, have a deadline for this. They can't take forever. It would take about 18 months. And if they manage to do that, their question would automatically make it onto the agenda of either the next UN General Assembly or the Security Council, depending on the issue that they picked and where the competencies lie. And they would then commit themselves to debating the topic and voting on it. Ideally, they would also, this is, for example, what happens in the European Union, they would allow the representatives of the initiative to present their initiative in front of the heads of state so that there can be an actual debate. So that's really in a nutshell, and we can talk more about that later. Yeah, and so our second challenge to you, our second question was, what kind of initiatives would you organize? And I have to read this, I have to make this a little bit bigger so that I can read this. Yeah, so because what is really important to us is that this is just an instrument, of course, and that it can be used by many different kind of initiatives. We live in a different world with many different points of view and different ideas. And so the idea is really that this can be used by as many people as possible. Democracy lives off debate and dialogue. So we wanted to know also what kind of initiatives world initiatives you would organize. And so here are some of the suggestions you made. To help oppressed minorities, for example, yeah, the Uyghurs in China, I think that's a very good example, because that's exactly the kind of initiative that is not in any state's interest, but that is of importance to a lot of individuals. Initiative that concerns itself with the re-education that gets away, with food that gets away, that gets thrown away. Yeah, absolutely. So reduction of food waste would be a good candidate as well. Sovereign money, all nations take cooperative and synchronized action to take power to create money out of thin air. So yes, sort of an international currency, that would also be interesting. Improve bicycle infrastructure, so mobility. That's something that you can do, of course, locally in many places. But there might be ways to also make that a global issue. And then, of course, we asked, what would you do then to support this campaign? So how could you run a citizens initiative like this? Social media is a big one, of course, because it would have to run mostly online. You would need government support, absolutely, because in the end, it will be governments that vote for it at the UN. Even if you do have a World Citizens Initiative that's successful, they're the ones who have to implement it. Civil society organizations that work on similar topics, that is definitely something that we also see from experience in Europe, that's a very good way to launch initiatives, because you need a big alliance and people who are able to organize different things. Yeah, and it's the same thing, existing campaigns alongside, yeah, that are campaigning on similar topics. Yeah. Yeah, and then so for the final question, and I'm trying to keep it short at the week so that we can move to the next point, the final challenge, we asked you to have a look at some of the things that we've already done with our campaign. So some campaign milestones. Yeah, and so I see that you've, a couple of people found some nice things. I will just show you this. So what I've already mentioned is that we've had, of course, a feasibility study. We've managed to get civil society endorsement from all over the world. We've organized conferences, we've organized webinars, we've had many people participate, but two things are actually really big because they happened in connection with processes at the United Nations themselves. So as I mentioned, in 2020, the UN turned 75, and the UN themselves organized this year-long series of discussions with people around the world, asking them what do they want from the UN. And so 1.5 million people participated in this, and one of the things that they suggested, one of the things that came out of these discussions with people was that they want more citizen participation at the UN. And so the UN themselves, in their own report, in their own UN 75 report, suggest that a World Citizens Initiative could be a solution for this. So that is, of course, a huge, huge milestone to have the UN themselves mention this. And they've done a couple of things since. So they presented that these results at the beginning of this year. And so the member states have asked Secretary General Antonio Guterres of the UN to come up with a plan for reform of the UN. So based on these consultations. And he's drafting that right now, and he will present it in September at the next General Assembly. So in just a little more than a month, or in 2 months. And in there will also be actual proposals on how to make the UN more, the term that they use is upgrade the UN. So it's more inclusive, more democratic. That's how we understand it. And so to do that, they launched a digital consultation. And in this digital consultation online, so again, this was the UN themselves, the World Citizens Initiative was the second most voted proposal on their platform. So we really see that people are enthusiastic about this idea and that people are really pushing for this. And we, of course, also hope that this means that Guterres will take a cue from what people have said in their own consultations and will take this into his reform proposal. And then another thing which many of you noticed and put into your answers. So each year the General Assembly is presided by the President of the General Assembly. They are re-elected on a yearly basis. And so this year, for the first time ever, there was a sort of an opposition race between two candidates. And they had public debates, which is also quite rare. And they asked civil society representatives to ask questions to which the candidates proposed answers. And so we were one of 8 organizations allowed to ask a question. And so we actually got the person, Abdullah Shahid, who is the foreign minister of the Maldives, who got elected as president of the General Assembly, to say that he is in favor of more citizen participation. Yeah, we have a lot of momentum right now, and we hope that we can make something happen. And so that was my not so quick recap, as it turns out, of the challenges. If there are any questions right now on what the UNWCI is or on things you read during the challenges, then please go ahead and let us know. We thought that this is a good time for Q&A, and then afterwards we will go into a debate in which we hope that you will really actively participate, because we will do things a little bit differently, but Kim will explain that. Yeah, so if there's any questions, please go ahead. I will stop the screen sharing now.
Yeah, there are 2 questions, Caroline, by Frank in the chat. There's one question about the signatures. Can they be electronic. I mean, I can take this up. Maybe you have something to say also, Caroline, to that. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you can imagine for a global campaign, they really should be electronic. They should be also available on paper. That's also what our expert study said, that there should be a possibility to be on paper, but as you can imagine, electronic signatures will be even more relevant. And so really important that there is a strong infrastructure for an online collection system then at the global level. This will of course have to be then under the United Nations. This is also the case, if you're familiar with the European Citizens Initiative, there's also online collection system, two actually at the moment, a central one that's run by the European Commission, and you can also set up your own that has to then be, of course, approved by the European Commission to follow certain standards. So online is possible, but also offline is possible too.
And I think it's important to note, this is not an existing tool. So we think something like this should exist, but of course, how we implement it is something that needs to be debated and developed. And yeah, but I think digital for a global tool makes a lot of sense, yes.
There's another question by Frank in the chat, also about the role then of organizations. I can read out loud, or if you'd like, Frank, I mean, you can also unmute yourself. We can also hear from you.
Yes, it seems to me that often you have so many organizations there, which is very impressive. It seems to me that with digital tools, also more home office, etc., the unit of organization, it seems to me that it's going towards individual level. What are your thoughts about that? I'm also thinking about, all the complexities and cost of hierarchy that is being written a lot about, that we could both make the whole process more efficient and also less costly by, trying to handle this organization thing more intelligently. Yeah, what are your thoughts about that?
I think on the basis we of course really agree on that the way that it works right now is I vote for a party, and that party then goes into I'm from Belgium, so that party goes into coalition talks. That coalition ends up usually not really looking like what most people voted for. They then negotiate on the programs that they had, that I voted for, and they change them, they water them down a little bit. And with that, they then send somebody to the United Nations who's going to represent me. So that is obviously a very long way from what I believe in. And of course, maybe I also didn't think about who's going to represent me at the United Nations when I cast my vote. Maybe there was something else that was more important to me at the moment. So on the basic, I think that we agree that, of course, it is impossible to find somebody to represent you who will do that 100% accurate. And so that is why it's good to have tools, as I said, that are complementary, where you can say, I found somebody who I sort of like a party that I agree with for 70%, and I'm really happy with that, and they are going to represent me very well. But on the other 30%, I like to have the chance to get my vote back, yes, and to suggest my own things, and so that is. I think that's what you mean, is this sort of more like individual level of making politics, and what differentiates us from generations 100 years ago is that we can actually really do this because we have the digital tools right now, we have the organizational tools right now to make this happen, and regardless of that, even without that, in Switzerland, they've managed to somehow, it's a smaller area, of course, but they've managed to somehow make this work for a really long time. So even without digital tools. I see there's more questions in the chat. I'm trying to keep up.
Two more questions, if I'm not mistaken. One by John about how smaller organizations can get more involved and support UN citizens initiatives in a more coordinated manner. Of course, right, so as we mentioned, so this is not an existing tool, this is just an idea we want to have, but a totally feasible tool. But smaller organizations, I mean, all organizations are involved, of course, they get involved for the campaign for a UN citizens initiative. As Caroline showed on the map, we're trying to fill the map so we can get for full geographical representation. Right now we're covering a lot of different regions. I think all continents are covered, but yeah, we'd like to grow from there. As far as then, once this would exist, once we would have UN Citizens Initiative and how smaller organizations can get involved. I mean, it's going to be a huge effort, right, to run a World Citizens Initiative. So organizations, small and large, especially then at the local level, there'll really need to be a push to get a citizens initiative to be successful. So if we're, for example, thinking of a climate action, it'll be important also for local organizations working on climate issues to really push that if it's going to be successful and reach those the goal that we set, 5 million signatures then within 18 months.
Yeah, and then maybe I'll read out the next question. So it says inclusive participation has been the base process. The signatories and voice of local people in Africa is important, as many people may not have access to electronic platforms. Physical sign-in forms that are photographed would be adequate. Yes, I think that's a really important point. So that is something that we've also thought about. Of course, digital access is an important tool, but it can't be the only tool. It has to be inclusive, it has to work everybody, and we have to think of people who don't have access to a laptop, to a smartphone, or to the internet. And so, yeah, for example, yeah, absolutely, paper forms. I think that's a really great. That's a really great suggestion. Physical sign-in forms that are photographed. That's definitely something that needs to be thought of, and that needs to be taken into developing the idea further. Yeah, and then I think that's maybe the last question, and then we can maybe move on to the next bit. Christoph writes in the chat, I recognize the common forces of your endeavors. However, I personally miss the empowerment of the UN responsibles to wake up their nations to do more for environment and global protection of our world. So I think that this is really a core idea to the World Citizens Initiative, is that citizens, by signing a World Citizens Initiative and by doing that really on such a large scale, 5 million people, that they tell the UN, you have a mandate now to do this. You have a mandate to take action on, for example, climate change, and that it also that it creates a sense of responsibility with heads of state to do something about it, where beforehand they may have thought that they don't really have the voter support for that or something. So this is really a way to create a global public discussion on an issue, and to really give that mandate and that push in the back of like, this is a topic that is important to enough people that you really should act on it. And it's a way to give to create a sense of responsibility, actually. I hope that sort of answers that. Yeah, thank you. I think then there's no more questions.
All right, great. This is a really, really good start. Perfect. So our next part is going to be the discussion, which will be kicked off by Daniela passionately argumenting for the World Citizens Initiative, and me and maybe some of you try to argue against it. So we will basically try and simulate a devil's advocate discussion. So if any doubts that you have formed in your mind during what Caroline was saying, write them down. Let's give them hell, or argue for the United for the Citizens Initiative. It's up to you. I have a few points I do still feel a bit unsure about, that will definitely need to be addressed. But now, Daniela, there you go.
Yeah, thanks for that, Kim. Yeah, so now you know a little bit more about our idea for a World Citizens Initiative, but you might not yet be convinced that it's the instrument that the UN needs. But I can tell you, I mean, a lot of the issues and criticisms that the UN faces today, and what is what exactly that the EU faced many years ago, to some extent, of course, still facing. In the UN, as Carly mentioned, there are no real opportunities for citizens to have a say. There are no elections, there's no platform where citizens can bring their issues up, and there's really no democratic infrastructure. Maybe the farthest the UN has gotten, and this is by increasing the role of NGOs in its various councils, like the Human Rights Council, but otherwise regular people don't have a say. Maybe if you're somebody like Greta Thunberg, you might have a say then at the UN, but everyday people really don't have a platform not to influence the agenda of the UN. Even though actually global issues are obviously hitting us on the ground level where it's really affecting the citizens. We see it, of course, with climate change. I mean, right now we're dealing with a global pandemic. We're still dealing with things like poverty and world hunger that obviously need a global cooperation, a really focused global cooperation. But it's just diplomats and ministers and high-level people that are making decisions about these things. Not to say that we don't need these representatives to do these jobs, but why just a handful of people at the top when these are issues that obviously affect us all. And together, I mean, billions of people, we might have a more innovative or creative and effective way to solve these issues. Or we might even bring new issues to the table, which so far is not on the agenda of the UN. So these were some of the arguments in the EU many years ago, but at least in the EU, we've tackled this democratic deficit significantly with the introduction of the European Citizens Initiative. And if you're from Europe, or if you're a little bit familiar with our projects at Democracy International, you'll know a thing or two about the European Citizens Initiative. The short story is collecting 1 million signatures on a topic within 1 year. You can basically land on the desk of the European Commission. And the ECI is exactly what the World Citizens Initiative is based off of, scaled, of course, to the global level. It's not a perfect tool, and nothing can be done in the beginning, in the first few stages and growing years of the tool. But the ECI, at least, has also improved a lot with the years, especially once campaigners started to use it more, once people started to learn about it. There was also a revision process that changed the rules of the game and how signature collection worked for the ECI. So it made the European Citizens Initiative now a much more a tool that it's making it much easier to launch and to sign an initiative. So it's been 9 years now of existence, and there's been 7 successful ECIs. Successful meaning they've collected those 1 million signatures within 1 year. A few have seen political successes as well, including just last month related to ending caged farming. So I mean, it's true, of course, the UN functions quite differently than the EU, but both rely on member states to carry out political commitments. But really the question is, if there's no World Citizens Initiative, what is the alternative to that? And how else can we then give citizens a direct say and a chance to influence the UN agenda? Because a citizens initiative tool is really the only way to achieve this. And even if it starts as maybe the first few years, a little more politically weak tool, just like the ECI did in its first few years, at least it will exist. And that's a starting point and a stepping stone for it to evolve and improve with time, where eventually it does begin to make a political impact, like the ECI does now in its more later years. It didn't start out as a perfect tool. It's still not a perfect tool, but it definitely is still a learning tool, and it's growing, and it's definitely getting better with the years. But first, it needs to exist. So yeah, I mean, just to finish on this, the ECI it's a phenomenon in itself. Of course, is the first and so far only tool of transnational democracy, but it does prove that transnational democracy can work. That's a good reason to believe that it would work on the global level as well with the World Citizens Initiative.
What can I say to that? No, actually, while you were talking, I was thinking back to all the discussions I had with other people about it. And my first question is, why exactly should ordinary citizens have anything to do with the politics going on in the UN? It's very complicated. There are very, very many interdependencies that ordinary citizens, as you call them, they can't know of. How can we know that doing something for the Uyghurs in China will help them, but what other consequences will it have on a global level?
Yeah, I mean, I could say a few words about this, and Irene then wants to take it up. I mean, why citizens should even care at all? I mean, first of all, you can choose your own initiative, right? So it's not like you're going to a ballot box and it's like a list of already predetermined candidates that are on there, and you're choosing a representative then for the next 5 years, and then you're staying at home waiting for your representative to take up the issues that maybe you care about, but really it's this in-between process of getting involved, and you can choose then the issues that you want to put forward or sign. They're already forward, but I mean, the World Citizens Initiative would be basically then a right of all global citizens to put these ideas forward. So if there's an idea is not yet on the agenda of the UN, or maybe is, but is not really being tackled the right way, this is then a tool that you would use to bring that forward, to put more public pressure than on the UN to act. So it's not saying that it's the answer to everything, but at least it would be more of like a public tool, it would give more impact and put a little more public pressure than give more awareness to the issues that citizens would really want. And they would choose themselves which initiatives, of course, so if there's some topic they maybe don't care about, that's of course, those are the issues probably that will not be very popular. But I guess we'll see for itself. I mean, when the tool does exist, we'll see which issues the citizens really do care about.
I just want to, I could pick up on it, but I think Christoph raised his hand also, and I just really want to repeat that the idea is that this is a very open, interactive debate, so feel free to pick in wherever you want. But Christoph, go ahead. I think you raised your hand, right?
Hello, everybody. Can you understand? Okay. I just raised my hand because I saw a colleague. I saw Simon Taverna. So I put him shorten the message because it's the first time I see him. So it's also the communication, and we need the communication all over the world, even between our small country. It's nice to see you all together. Thank you very much.
Thank you, and it's good to see that colleagues are finding each other in our Zoom room. But Frank is actually raising his hand, and I think. Please go ahead.
Yes, I would like to support Daniela on one thing, which is that direct democracy. I've experienced it now in Switzerland for some years and been able to vote a couple of times or a few times. And it helps me to learn. It helps me to become more curious. And the reason is, I think that I feel more belonging. I feel more included. And this means that I read more now that I can vote.
Yeah, Barnaby, you can go ahead, but I really want to pick in on that because I think it's something that's really important to me as well. We always, there's two things. I feel that in politics, there's one philosophy, if it affects me, I should be able to have a say in it. Otherwise, it's not democracy. And the other thing is, by letting people decide on things, you make them responsible for things. You give them the responsibility to think about something and to really come up with a solution. And so I think that we will all be better citizens with the World Citizens Initiative. But yeah, Barnaby, please go ahead.
So I'm wondering how, once there's an obvious statement of intent by people around the world towards a specific issue, how can citizens of the world hold the UN and the nations of the UN to account? So how can people of the world be empowered to drive nations to cooperate with each other to implement these policies, when it's often in the short-term interests of nations to outcompete each other, i.e. to not cooperate?
Yeah, I don't know, Danielle, if you want to pick something up on that, or
you can take this one.
Yeah, so I'm not sure I really understood the question. So yeah, how can we hold states to account? Is that it? Of course, it's just one tool, you know.
But I mean, so that a policy has gone forward and it's been debated by the UN, and the individual, the representatives of each member state. How can the people who suggested the proposal and all the people of the world ensure that the UN actually implement it?
Yeah.
What tool, what power, what agency do people of the world have to say, this is obviously popular, why aren't you doing it?
Yeah, of course, this is the problem with the high level of indirectness of representation at the UN. Is that we won't all go to vote and then say this person didn't do a good job at the General Assembly. But there's a couple of tools that exist. For example, I mentioned I'm from Belgium, and in Eastern Belgium, which is a terribly small place to compare to the big world out there. But they have a sort of third chamber that is a citizens' assembly. And so they are randomly selected citizens, and that process is interesting in itself, but that's not the point I'm getting at. They propose legislation to the parliament there, and then they are implicated in the review process, which means that after a year they get asked, do you think that the parliament did a good job implementing your proposals? And so that is something that is absolutely possible also with a citizens initiative, that you ask the organizers, do you think that your proposal was adequately in an official process, so not just a press release or something, but you involve them in the official review process of the follow-up on the citizens initiative. And that's something that is totally feasible even right now, even with a highly indirect representation at the UN. But of course, there's many other tools, and I saw that some people were posting about the UN Parliamentary Assembly, which we will discuss in 2 weeks. So it's of course it's one instrument in a toolbox of many things that we need. So it can't be a catch-all, but it's one thing that we think will make things better.
Maybe just to add quickly to that, I think it picks up on some of the questions in the chat. But successes could also be measured in different ways. So, I mean, it could be that also a successful World Citizens Initiative, or maybe even an unsuccessful one, it inspires legislation also at member state level, or maybe at regional level, at global level. We see it also with the European Citizens Initiative, where unsuccessful initiatives have inspired legislation at these different levels, or even if they have been unsuccessful, as in not collecting the threshold, that they've also inspired legislation because they were just generally good ideas that then that politicians took up. I mean, we know this in Europe with the data roaming, free roaming. We don't have that if you cross now across different member states in the EU. This was an unsuccessful European Citizens Initiative some years way back when. So this can also be the case. Success can be measured also in different ways.
I think there's another question, Didier, please go ahead.
Yes, thank you. So, well, first, I'm in favor of this proposal, and I'm also in favor of UNPA. I don't think there is something, well, they can go together. But no, you were asking to ask, let's say, to be the advocate of the devil. So I will ask 2 or 3, kind of complicated questions. First, I have to admit that I didn't read the document who is online, the 80 pages document about the initiative, so maybe the answers are there. But the first one is, what are you doing? So the first question is, what are your plans concerning which kind of questions are admitted? And the second question is just following this one. So if there are people, let's say, let's be very simple, against the human rights, for example, are you going to say, oh no, it's only about human rights? Oh no, I know, for example, at the in the Belgian system, you can not have a referendum or when it is about human rights. But then if you say it cannot be about questions about human rights, it cannot be in the bad direction, but also not in the good direction. So how are you handling this in short? You know, for example, let's say, yeah, people want to LGBT people to be really, yeah, Okay, that's maybe I'm probably I'm clear. Thank you. I hope.
Maybe I can take. So the first point you mentioned, the UNPA, they should go together. We agree on that. So we actually partnered up with the UN Parliamentary Assembly campaign and the campaign for a UN Civil Society Envoy. So we really do see it as part of a package. Just as a side note, and then. So which kind of questions? I think Daniela can probably answer that better with the example of the EU. So it of course depends on the body that you're petitioning to and what they are allowed to do. So we can't ask for something that they can't do. And then, yeah, the human rights question is a big one, an important one, and this is also in this little study that we have, this academic study that we have. Of course, any initiative that would go against anything that's in the UN Declaration of Human Rights would just not be admittable. How do you say you also can't do anything in the positive sense? I have to say I hadn't thought of that, because we always think so much of like how to protect human rights. I hadn't thought of the possibility that people might want to add new human rights. I think that would probably not be a problem. I think the problem would be in curtailing rights that are already in the treaties. But I have to say that that's a new question to me as well.
Yeah, maybe I can just add to the question about which initiatives, how that would go forward and how that would work. So, I mean, the idea would be that there would be a registration administration. In our study, we call it a World Citizens Initiative Administrative Board, and they would basically check whether an initiative can and should be registered even to begin with. So, of course, I mean, like we said, it should follow, I mean, it needs to follow the UN Charter, respect human rights, but also something that can follow UN powers. So, you know, not an initiative that's like, and plastic bags in Germany, for example, that the UN, you know, obviously cannot do anything with. And this is comparable to, in Europe, we have, of course, the European Commission that is making these decisions, that is deciding which initiatives get registered or not. This doesn't exist at the UN level, but that's why we say, first we need to lay the groundwork, of course, before we have a World Citizens Initiative. So, for example, setting up this World Citizens Initiative Administrative Board. In addition to that, I mean, there should also be the possibility to challenge maybe decisions that the World Citizens Initiative Administrative Board makes. So in some cases in the EU, the European Commission has rejected initiatives that then people have come back and said, no, that we think this was the wrong idea. This has gone to the European Court of Justice. Something like this doesn't exactly exist in the UN, but this is why in our expert report, we call for an independent ombudsman person that would then be kind of like the watchdog for this and make sure that things are being followed and the rules are being followed. So it would be kind of like this administrative board that is making the rules of the game, following the rules of the game. That should be established first, and they're dealing with basically registering the initiative and all of the administrative things that have to do with the ECI or with the World Citizens Initiative.
I see that Frank was trying to help Kim being the devil's advocate. In the meantime, you can go ahead and say that, knowing that we are close to having to wrap up, so we try to keep it short.
Yes, I experience in Switzerland. It's great. I love direct democracy. I think it's the right thing to do. But to support Kim a little bit here, it can take a long time, and sometimes that's not an advantage. There are some things where we have to act swiftly. For example, now a COVID pandemic and also storms and other things where we need to take decisions and apply resources fast to help people. Yeah.
I can. I mean, anybody else can feel free to jump in here. But from my point of view, that's exactly why we have a government. We have an executive branch. They are there. That's why we gave them a mandate to act fast, because when emergencies arise, we can't talk to everybody and see what they think. That's exactly what they're there for. And especially the UN, especially when it comes to emergencies, they have been really good. They have OCHA, for example, is the humanitarian relief. Disaster preparedness, which is they do amazing work, and they have things ready to go when we need them. So I think this is one point where we can also say like we also have to say the good things. This is why we need the UN, and this is something that that has been working really well, and that maybe direct democracy is good for making laws. It's not very good for reacting to things.
So actually, Treuhand made an argument also helping me out and asking you why exactly would citizens get involved if the result is, yes, the General Assembly has heard you and they've decided not to ask. Thank you very much. What do you have to say to that?
I think maybe, I mean, from the European Union perspective, there's a lot to be said for that or against that. Obviously, we hope that that won't happen. We hope that at least that when you have gone through the trouble of collecting 5 million signatures in at least 10 countries, that that our elected representatives have the decency to take that seriously. Yeah, Daniela, I think this has happened in the EU, actually, right?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, yes, but so the idea is that it adds an extra level of a pressure, right? Because now this tool exists. I mean, the UN went to the trouble of setting it up and making sure that it works. And so it's an extra level now of public pressure alongside maybe other levels, maybe from member states, of course. So it's just that there's no, the idea is that there's no infrastructure for this citizens pressure other than maybe going out in front of the street and front of the UN. Other than that, I mean, this would be like the instrument then to put that public pressure. This is the same case with the ECI. It's not directly 100% binding instrument that the Commission has to do something with the initiative, but they have to respond. And at least, I mean, what we call for also in our report is that the General Assembly or Security Council, they would have to at least respond and say, if we're going to do something, here's our response to it. If we're not going to do something with this, here's also our reasons for why we decide not to do something for it. Yes, but I mean, as we said, this has been the case of the ECI the first few years, because maybe also the European Commission was a little bit this, power play struggle of how much power do we really give the citizens right now. But over the years, it has really improved. And I think in real life, I mean, I think this will be the case with the World Citizens Initiative. The first few years will be a little bit more this like safety, kind of distance themselves from the instrument. It's there, but let's play it safe. But I think over the years you'll build that trust. We can see it now with the ECI. I mean, as I mentioned 1 month ago, we just heard the Commission announce that they will take up a successful European Citizens Initiative. So yeah, I mean, political impact comes from many different ways. It might not even be legal impact, but it could be political impact at different levels too, as I mentioned, also at local level or at member state level. So we can measure success differently.
So I think we might have to wrap up soon. We are already past 6.
Maybe we can do one more question. I have, of course, many different questions, but anybody in the audience, if you want to say something, say it now. We had a lively discussion with Mark in the chat. Do you want to say something to everyone?
Not really, just I enjoyed the afternoon, and I look forward to linking all the things together. I think it's a little artificial to discuss one thing in isolation. The World Citizens Assemblies, and particularly the UNPA leading maybe to a world parliament, it probably all have to be linked in, as I said, as part of the toolkit to make it all work together. You can't solve the governance problem with just one initiative. You need a variety of things.
Well, I couldn't have said that better. I absolutely agree.
Maybe Kim, you have one last question for us. Maybe either your most challenging question or your favorite question that hasn't been answered yet.
Well, I have been thinking about stateless people and how they can be included, and because obviously in Europe we've had a lot of issues with people trying to get to the EU, to Europe and live here and get like citizen status. And if they're not part of a state, they can probably not vote on one of, or give their signatures on one of these initiatives. Have you thought about what exactly, how we could include these people? Because predictions have been that there are going to be more and more refugees over in the next decades.
Yeah, I mean, admittedly, this is probably our most challenging question too. So you're playing devil's advocate very well, because this is a question, of course, we thought about, and it's difficult for us to even have an answer to it. But we can think about it, of course. I mean, we can think, for example, if you're filling out a form and if it asks for your ID number, there's a box you tick under there. You say, I am stateless, and we can have an extra, maybe an extra option for this, to mention that. It's just a question about how then these signatures will be verified. I guess we have to look at maybe some experts to see how exactly this is done. At least I can tell you in the EU, that's done at the member state level, but maybe we can say in the residency. So maybe in this case, we can say where you live instead of your where, you know, passport if you're stateless in your country of residency, and they can be maybe then verified. Usually this is done by random sample. But yeah, this is something that we need to explore a little bit more. If anyone has a good solution to this, please do come forward.
Well, Barnaby posted one in the chat, proof of humanity. That looks really interesting. Of course, I'm just seeing this for the first time. But in general, there are solutions, of course, that are possible and that would need to be thought about and that can be put in place. But blockchain, for example, is one option that offers many possibilities, where you could prove to be an actual person without having to have a state verify that for you. So there are again technological possibilities. There are also more people are. Barnaby, you can feel free to say that, because I feel that you probably know this better than I do. Because he's posting a lot of interesting things in the chat.
So I've been interested in global governance for a long time, and I set up an organization called Global People Power, and we've joined an organization that formed this year, just a couple of months ago, called the Global Democracy Initiative. And within that, most of the organizations that have joined have an interest in digital online direct democracy, and I have more of an interest in world citizens' assemblies, creating global policies, like a multi-issue range of global policies. But then you could have national citizens' assemblies who agree to whether they either agree on the policies or make suggestions or vote against them, and then they would and then you could vote for politicians who sign up to cooperate globally and therefore drive it to happen. Politicians that become world citizens as well.
Oh, that's really interesting. I wish we had more time to go into detail. Simon, how about 1 minute? Whatever you have to say, say it now.
I just have a practical interest or question. How is it possible to get the attraction of a government to support your idea of a WCI? How can you reach these people, because they have to give away some of their influence in the General Assembly? So what are the ways to get yourself heard in these by these people?
Yeah, so this is of course something that we're working on a lot right now, because if we're gonna have a World Citizens Initiative, we're gonna need governments to vote for it to implement it. So we are working on trying to create a group of governments that's friendly to the idea, and there are some governments out there that like this idea. We hope that the European Union will try and push it forward, as they are sort of like the example that we're basing ourselves on. So we hope that they have the pride to want to promote this also on a global level. Yes, of course, this is a limit of our campaign, and the only thing we can do. This is also why we try to reach civil society organizations in as many countries as possible. The only thing we can do is apply national level pressure. So we need organizations everywhere who want to take up this issue and petition their governments to vote for this. So one thing we did, for example, in the past month is we wrote to all of the foreign ministries of the democratic member states of the UN, so about 80 in total, informing them of our idea, asking them what their position on it is, hoping that they push for it. And of course, there's a lot of that's work that we're going to keep doing and that we hope to intensify and that we hope other people will do with us. There's no way around it.
I just want to say maybe one last thing to that, just to really emphasize how important civil society is to really put pressure on this. And again, I bring up the European Citizens Initiative, but also back, I mean, when it was just an idea, this was over 20 years ago, this was Democracy International and its founding members and democracy activists that were the ones putting pressure then at the last convention to decide then whether the ECI would make it into the Lisbon Treaty, the treaty we have now in the EU. So this also has the ECI and the tool that we have now that we always use to compare the World Citizens Initiative to, it has civil society and democracy activist roots in it. And so just to say, maybe this is really the start then of something bigger, but this is also where the pressure starts, is also right here. And of course, we need to win over the member states in real life, but this is already, we're at a good start.
All right, that's a perfect ending. We've been 10 minutes over the time anyway. We thank you so much for listening, for coming, for debating. This was really fun. I know we could go on for ages and ages, but what we can do is come again in 2 weeks on the 11th of August and discuss with us the UN Parliamentary Assembly, which in the chat we were talking about already. And yeah, thank you very much and have a nice day.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Have a nice evening. Bye.